What's up everybody, it's RobinGaming here. It is almost 7 years ago when we saw the first glimpse, and almost 5 years ago when I came in touch with what was going to be PlayStation 3's flagship franchise and my personal favorite series ever, Uncharted. In those 7 years, things have changed drastically. Not only has Uncharted changed a lot in terms of its own titles, but it also changed the entire gaming industry. In this video, I'll be taking a look back at the entire series from the start to where we are now, but also at what exactly happened to Naughty Dog, to the industry, and where the franchise is headed. This is looking back at Uncharted. PlayStation 3 had a rough start. Not only did the console come out a year after the 360 and was it in many people's eyes far too expensive with a price tag of $600, it also didn't really have any real games that made you want to buy a PS3. Sure, it had Resistance 12 Man, it had Motorstorm, and it had Heavenly Sword, but they all didn't really live up to what they were meant for. Sony was in desperate need of a real system seller. E3 2006, Naughty Dog, a very well known and respected company famous for their Crash Bandicoot and Jak and Daxter series, finally revealed their newest project. At the time, no name had been given to it yet, but we all know that it would later be known by the name of Uncharted Drake's Fortune. Sony seemed to be really putting their hopes on this franchise, and at the time people still had doubts as to whether that was the right thing to do. Sure, the developers of the game were known as incredibly talented because of their previous games, but the series didn't seem like it had that full potential to become what it is seen as today. A lot of comparisons with Tomb Raider were made as well, with some people even making fun of it by calling it Dude Raider. All in all, it was still unsure whether Uncharted would become the series Sony really needed. Well, it did. The release of Uncharted Drake's Fortune in November 2007 finally was the success Sony desperately needed. The game was praised for its cinematic approach, visuals, and probably most of all characters. When Nathan Drake at first was seen as a really generic guy in a bad way, it now became clear that was actually one of his advantages. People could relate to Nathan Drake. He was seen as an ordinary guy everyone could have been. Sure, the whole series has been plagued by some people calling him a mass murderer, killing hundreds of guys every game, and if there's one thing he isn't, it's being an ordinary guy, but I think it should be looked at as just gameplay that's there to entertain the gamer and fulfill the needs he may feel for the type of gameplay we're used to nowadays, shooting people. The game also didn't have multiplayer. Now, even though most people did not see that as a complaint, the game itself was only 8 hours long and lacked real replay value. In a time where people weren't quite used to short single players yet, this was a hard thing to adapt to. Overall though, the game stood strong with a Metacritic rating of 88 out of 100 and over 2.6 million units sold, so a sequel was inevitable. And that sequel came. Uncharted 2 Among Thieves was revealed at the Spike Video Game Awards of 2008 with a teaser showing Drake wandering in the snow and the trailer of him sitting in a train hanging off a cliff, which would ultimately become the first cutscene of the game. It immediately got a lot of attention and hype, and most people seemed to have really high expectations. One of the first announcements of the game was its multiplayer mode, which to most came as no surprise. It was received as something that could potentially be very good, but nobody would really put money on it yet. With E3 around the corner, Naughty Dog had to go all out, and they did. The E3 demo we saw on Sony's huge stage made people aware once again that this game was going to be a must-have. The demo involving a collapsing building that Drake just manages to escape is still something everyone who saw it would remember. And then there was the multiplayer open beta, which was received very well and brought the game attention to the mainstream public as well. The game was sure shaping up to become a big success, but would it be able to compete in what might still be the best year for gaming this gen, 2009, with games like Assassin's Creed 2 and Modern Warfare 2 coming within a time frame of merely several weeks?
I mean, what could possibly go wrong?
The answer is yes. Uncharted 2 Among Thieves was the success everyone hoped for. The single-player story that sent Drake and his friends on an expedition to the lost city of Shambhala was received even better than its predecessor. Everything was perfect about it. From the story, to the improved visuals, to the gameplay, to the humor, and then it even introduced new characters like Chloe, Lazarevich and Flynn, which were truly amazing additions to the game. And then there was the basic style multiplayer mode, which really became a sleeper hit. It's still a shame the multiplayer was changed drastically with the infamous patch 1.05, which decreased health by a significant amount, causing for a much different experience, but it remained a multiplayer that was being played by thousands of people for the months to come. Uncharted 2 was the game everyone talked about in 2009, and even though games like Assassin's Creed 2 and Modern Warfare 2 came out in the weeks after it, the game that remained to show the most activity on the boards was Uncharted 2. With over 200 Game of the Year awards, it is no surprise it is still being seen by many as the best game of this generation, and in some cases, including myself, the best game of all time. Would Naughty Dog be able to ever top it? rumors were spreading around heavily about the announcement of a possible third entry in the series, and a week before the Spike Video Game Awards of 2010 it finally happened. Uncharted 3 Drake's Deception was a fact. A small teaser with a full-blown trailer at the VGAs was being shown, and it immediately became clear the new theme was going to play a big role: the desert. The main question people were asking themselves was of course whether it would be able to be even better than Uncharted 2, and the following months had to show that. Similarly to Uncharted 2, one of the first things promoted for Drake's Deception was its new multiplayer mode. It focused a lot more on the cinematic experience, with a flying plane section showing that off during matches. Then there was the improved customizability and the focus on team play with your assigned buddy. It sure looked like an improvement over Uncharted 2, but at the same time looked like it was meant to serve the mainstream market a bit more. Ah well, at least the amount of health we remembered from Uncharted 2 pre-patch 1.05 was brought back. This was followed by E3 and Gamescom, at which we saw awesome demos of Drake escaping a sinking ship and falling out of a flying plane. People sure were excited for this game, though it once again, just like Uncharted 2, had some killer competition with games like Battlefield 3, Modern Warfare 3 and Skyrim. But would Uncharted 3 be able to deliver what was hoped for? Yes and no. Let's start off with the bad parts. The campaign. It wasn't up to par with Uncharted 2. Not only were characters like Talbot and Marlowe far less interesting than Lazarevic and Flynn, there were also some significant plot holes to find. Even though that personally didn't bother me as much, the way Naughty Dog had to explain some points later on via interviews just isn't the way to do it. But that wasn't all. The single player just lacked that special feeling overall that Uncharted 2 did have. It wasn't this epic journey anymore that felt like it took place all in one go and that you were experiencing by yourself. Rather, Uncharted 3 felt like set pieces and locations connected to each other by simple transitions. The story also tried to copy Uncharted 2 a bit too much in some way. I mean, another lost city to go after that ultimately gets destroyed. There was far less humor this time around, or at least it was less funny. The game was only 7 to 8 hours long, going back to the length of the first game, and then there were things like bonus features such as cheating modes like having unlimited ammo, playing as different skins in the single player, etc. that were just not available while previous installments did have them. Again, I personally didn't really mind, but a lot of other people did, and rightfully so since they were used to playing with them in previous games. It just made for less replay value. And then there's things like motion blur, a completely tweaked aiming system, and the cutscene viewer that had to be patched in later on. All in all, even though the single player was still great, I just couldn't understand how the amazing Naughty Dog, who created my personal favorite game of all time, could have made the single player with some features just lacking and the whole single player just being significantly worse than its predecessor. Still, there were good parts too. The set pieces in the game were better than anything we'd ever seen before. The burning French chateau chapter was amazing, and so was the final part of the game, but the sinking ship and crashing plane chapters may just as well be some of the best experiences I've ever had in gaming. The things we found out about Drake, such as his past with Sully and the origin of his name, were great plot points and added that tiny bit more personality to the story that we're used to seeing in Naughty Dog games. Then there was the multiplayer. Some may argue that it's worse than Uncharted 2, but the reality is that it's a lot different and in my opinion better. Instead of going for the Uncharted 2 style basic gameplay, it went for even more customizability, such as classes you could use with different guns, even more boosters, kickbacks, power plays, and just a lot of stuff that made matches a lot more unpredictable. Sure, some may argue that all these elements made the game less balanced, but I personally just found it a lot more fun to play. The set pieces we were used to from the single player, such as a moving train and plane that this time made an appearance in the multiplayer, were great ideas that were truly fitting because of the cinematic style of the game, but I just wish they were worked out a bit better, as spawn trapping could be a regular issue and player connections didn't always help either. Still, overall, I'd say the multiplayer gave the game a lot more replay value than Uncharted 2's and attracted a much bigger audience than before. Uncharted 3 was shaping up to become even better than Uncharted 2, but in the end it wasn't, which disappointed a lot of players. I've said it before, I didn't understand how Naughty Dog could have delivered a game that was a bit worse in almost every aspect, but the answer to that question came quick. The Last of Us. It took literally only a month for Naughty Dog to reveal their newest game at the Spike Video Game Awards. It became clear that the Naughty Dog team had split up to start something completely new. Now, I don't want to talk about The Last of Us in this video, but I do want to clear up a situation that many people seem to not understand. I've seen literally dozens of videos where people say that Uncharted 3 wasn't as good as Uncharted 2 because it was being made by people that had not been working on Uncharted 2. That is the biggest nonsense there is. Here's what truly happened. Up to the point of Uncharted 2, Naughty Dog had been fully working on a single game at a time. That is 100% of the people within the company. After Uncharted 2, Neil Druckmann and Bruce Straley, two of the leading people for the development of that game, came up with the first ideas for The Last of Us. Naughty Dog's co-presidents Evan Wells and Christopher Balestra decided to let them work on it, and more people slowly started to leave the Uncharted 3 team to work on The Last of Us. Up to the point of Uncharted 3 being released, the majority of the people within the company were probably still on the Uncharted team. After that, even more people left the Uncharted team to help The Last of Us team out in the final 1.5 years. That means right now there's still a smaller team working on a different project, and I'm sure that once The Last of Us is finished, a lot of people will move to the other team again. And just to clear it up, that doesn't mean that the people that made Uncharted 2 didn't make Uncharted 3, it just means less people made it. The overall work put into Uncharted 3 has been less, so the overall quality and amount of content was less. Understandable, right? One thing you have to understand though is that Naughty Dog is constantly hiring, more and more people are entering the company, so 100% of the people at the time of the release of Uncharted 2 may have been 20, 30, maybe even 40 people less than when Uncharted 3 came out. This means that you'll see that less people will have to swap teams in the future, ultimately causing two entirely different teams when nobody will have to jump anymore, and maybe being able to cause a Naughty Dog game to be published every single year, and that is quite an awesome thought. All in all, it has been quite a few years. Everyone who knows me knows that I really don't like complaining about things at all, so complaining about Uncharted 3 isn't something I do because I like it. I just feel deeply involved in the franchise and I wish for it to be the best it can be. That being said, Naughty Dog has been supporting the franchise with everything they could, and that I can only praise them for. But surely that can't mean that this is the end of Uncharted, right? My theory still stands, Uncharted 4 is coming. With Sony just having announced the PS4 and needing some killer titles for it that really need to sell the system, it's a no-brainer to me that Uncharted 4 will be announced this E3. Looking at Uncharted Golden Abyss, a game Sony needed to sell the PS Vita, even though it's not made by Naughty Dog and I don't count it as a real true entry in the series, it shows Sony decided those games need to happen to sell the system. Then there's Naughty Dog creating block mesh maps on the Uncharted engine after Uncharted 3, them still supporting the game so much to keep the player base active, and it going free to play to attract even more people. That just confirms what I already knew. And even though I see a lot of people coming up with fake statements like Naughty Dog having said Uncharted 3 is the end, they've always said we haven't seen the last of Drake yet and we'll see new entries as long as there's enough people that want them. But anyway, that's a topic I've already discussed in a video in October, and actually I also made a new second video about it this same month, which you will be able to find at the end of the video. So what do you think of Uncharted? Do you agree with me that it is the best series of this generation? Which Uncharted game do you like the most and where do you see the franchise going? Be sure to let me know in the comments. The future is surely looking bright and I can't wait to see where it's going. Thanks a lot for watching.